Continuing with research, current and future research projects, the NEED study by my colleagues Fleur van Dijk and Niti Galdi, consultants from the London EDS service.
Right, it will be only me for this session, but Niti will talk later on a bit further, so that will be very interesting too. I'm going to talk about vascular EDS research and specifically also about the NEED study. And of course, on this slide, you see a petri dish, and it suggests that actually all research takes place in the laboratory. But I think I'm always quite inspired by people, and I think the importance of good clinical assessments to see what actually are the problems that people are facing. And I think for me personally, the event in Blackpool 2018, where we met like 30 families, was very inspiring to really put in the effort to try to invest in clinical/translational research. So in 2018, lots of things happened. There was also a conference in Ghent, Belgium, and we there also looked at other rare types of EDS and really tried to document how many people we've seen with that rare type of EDS, what were their problems, what was new that hadn't been noted before, and what should be followed up further. And that was very well received, and it's definitely work that we are continuing. So as a highly specialized EDS service, and it applies to Sheffield as well as to London, of course, we have strength in numbers. We are seeing so many people, and we hear so many stories that they share with us about their medical history, which is important. So in 2019, we had a 10 years existence. Of course, we're now already much further along the line, so we really consider ourselves also an expert center. Like in Europe, there are a lot of expert centers being organized. And I think definitely the EDS service would be considered as such. So when we work in our EDS service and we see the people with vascular EDS, we note that the data that are in the literature, and you read medical papers, they're not always compatible with what we observe in clinic, or simply they're just not there. So what about, for example, vascular EDS in children? What are their problems? Or maybe there are no problems in certain aspects. There is a lot of territory still unknown. What about the life expectancy? I think we always hear numbers quoted, and we have quite different experiences when we think about the people that we've seen. What about the complications? We of course have already some data, cohorts that have been published, but it's still very small groups because it's a rare condition. What about pregnancies? Of course we have, also thanks to the Sheffield team, more advice on management of pregnancy. But definitely it would be important to zoom in on that aspect. And what is actually the experience of pregnancies in people who have been pregnant with vascular EDS, and there are quite a few. And then the other part is, of course, when you have a diagnosis of vascular EDS, there is a genetic cause, you have a diagnosis of vascular EDS. But then what actually influences the course of vascular EDS? What are the variables that potentially could make things worse or potentially could make things better? There's so many questions to ask. I showed this slide already, so I'll skip over it quickly. We think, and Niti and I really felt strongly about this, we needed to start with a database, a research database where we solidly capture all this data in the most systematic way possible. And it was really Annel's challenge at EDS UK who gave us time for it. And when we're thinking then further about clinical research for the rare EDS types, including vascular EDS, so we need a research database where you hold data of people with vascular EDS in a pseudonymized way, which means that no one will see the database, will know who these people are, but the people that are involved in the study, they will know. And also the ability to send out, for example, questionnaires to people where you can ask about, for example, pregnancy experience, musculoskeletal problems, all kinds of things that you could, apart from your clinical appointment, you could ask more information about. And you You may want to do additional investigations. For example, there is someone who really clinically you think has a rare type of EDS, but you cannot find the genetic cause. So what's happening there? How can we solve that? And of course, all of this is research, so you'll need consent from the people with the condition, and that needs to follow ethical and research regulation, and they're very tight. So you need to really show that you have set up a good research study. So when we were thinking all this, Niti and I, when we had some more time to think about also how to follow this up, the time it was, of course, very kindly given by NL's Challenge and EDS UK, we thought, okay, it's obviously not, there is no funding for it within the service, because we're funded to see people with vascular EDS and be doctors, and we're not funded to be researchers. So how would we get more funding actually to do more research, because that patient care can benefit from that? Of course, I show this map just because you can see the H is where actually we live in Norfolk Park Hospital. And then the academic heads point to a very big academic institute, which is actually Imperial College. And with such a big academic institute almost on your doorstep, would it not be an idea to try to foster academic collaborations where you could actually try to create interest, joint projects, funding? And so we were able, through links and connections, to start conversation with actually a director of the Imperial College BRC. Anything about that? Well, BRC is an important funding stream for research, and it's actually aimed at translating research into patient benefit. But it's actually aimed at academic stuff that's being done in labs, translating it to patient care. A bit like, for example, Nina showed. We thought that we want to do it the other way around. We have certain questions that we would like to solve. Would it be able to get to work together with also academic people to try to solve some of these questions through research projects? And we, of course, we had to write proposals, but we were in the end successful. We got a grant to actually do that. And from that money, among others, we could set up a natural history study, which is called the NEED study. And it's a study that involves all rare types of EDS, but definitely also vascular EDS, because it's one of our biggest group of people that we see in our clinic. So what's it all about? Increase knowledge about individuals with rare types of EDS. This will enable, for example, gene discovery, but definitely you want to also improve management and possibilities for new therapies. And what is important? Because, for example, how are you going to find out if your therapy that you're developing actually works? You would need to compare the group that gets the therapy with the group that doesn't, but also historical data are very important. So you need to have a really good grip on what the problems in the cohort are and how frequent they are. This was, for example, very important when there was the discussion about driving and vascular EDS, when actually the older studies quoted a significant higher annual risk of problems than, for example, a very new study published by the expert center in France. And based on also the experience of Sheffield and our service, it was actually the measures were wiped off the table because the risk of events didn't appear that high as they were in the older studies. So it's important to look at people with a condition. So this study is HRA REC approved. It has a database, and then we, through this study, can explore a lot of research questions. And of course, we aim also to participate in international collaborations with research questions regarding rare types of EDS, because what if you can look at your data and you can then also add it to the already existing data, for example, other cohorts that have been published. It makes your group much larger, it makes your data much more sound, and that's an important step that hasn't been taken. So how does it work, this NEED study? It's simply inviting people people to take part. So we started off in London with recruiting. We have recruited now 90 of our 236 individuals with vascular EDS. It's a lot of work. We were one of the first to set up virtual clinics where they could be consented. And of course, there is in total, if you also think about the other EDS groups, for example, classical EDS, there are more than 200 individuals recruited now. Future plans that we have, and it's also in our ethics proposal and it's approved, is self-recruitment, but we're currently mapping that process out. So, okay, what are we doing now? So we're recruiting patients, but how are we going to address all these research questions that we have? We have a research database, and we are populating our research database, and it is a RedCap database, which is solid because it's being maintained in Imperial College. So it's not a database that will potentially stop, or just there is no money left, so it can't actually go through. It's a quite well-known type of database, and it is maintained in an academic institute. We also have a clinical research assistant who is also funded by BRC, who does her PhD in Imperial College on clinical and genetic aspects of vascular EDS. I'll tell a bit more about that. And we have another PhD who also works as a doctor in our service, who really looks at clinical genetic aspects of classical EDS. This is the first paper of the PhD student really looking at vascular EDS in children and then evaluating the importance of the diagnosis and follow-up during childhood. One of the first papers really about children, and I noticed that ML Challenge has this paper available on their website, so it can be accessed. A really important question, I think, is, as a doctor, but definitely if I would be someone who had the condition, is how is the course of this condition influenced? So, as we already had first talk with the advocacy, it's important to be aware of your diagnosis, and it's important that your medical healthcare professionals are made aware. And that is already a way in which you can influence the condition, because you potentially can prevent problems or nip them up in the bud in the earlier stage. Of course, there is the surveillance, we have this talk as well, imaging. We can really look at the vessels and see whether any problems or not. We can give medication, we heard it today as well. We can know more about surgery, because of course also in the 2018 meeting there were lots of questions about surgery and what the surgeon should know and how that should actually be arranged if it was necessary in someone with vascular EDS. Well, of course it is more risky. And another influencing factor, I think, which is really important, is the lifestyle. Of course, we all have a lifestyle, some more healthy than others, but what then is actually a good lifestyle for people with vascular EDS? And that's an important question to ask. And that's where I wanted to also introduce Niti, my colleague. She will be talking later on about lifestyle, living well with vascular EDS. And there is not a lot of information about. We give some advice. We do think that we can have already a bit of an idea what would be a healthy lifestyle. For example, eat healthy, don't smoke, all these kind of things. But give advice about exercise. But what actually do people know about lifestyle? What actually are people doing with regard to activity? What is their lifestyle like? So this is a QR code, which is just a few questions for people who wanted to take part, and they are also distributed where also the food is. So you can always, if you want to participate, you can scan this code and you can help this a bit further. So, conclusion, because I know we're running out of time otherwise. The UK has, of course, this highly specialized EDS service, which should be considered an expert center. One in the north, one in the south. It is unique in the world. There are lots of countries actually being jealous and say, how did you pull this off? I didn't pull this off. I just was lucky to get a job in such a service. And then I think our next goal is how can we really contribute to research, given that we are an expert center. I think we need to take into account that there's a lot of movement in vascular EDS, and that there's research both nationally and internationally, and as it's a rare condition, we do need to collaborate because that will help the people. And also, we are quite convinced that this NEET study will contribute to the research to improve, really, in first instance, management of vascular EDS by simply looking at what is happening to the people that we see. So I wanted to thank you for your attention, and any questions I'm around today. And of course, there's also an email address if you would want to know more about this study. Thank you very much for your attention.